Tina Reynolds, and I'm with Uptown Studios, and this is our Uptown Studios live segment. And today I'm here with Dr. Avery Scherer. And what we really want to promote with these in a big segment of the world that we're doing is to promote women in successful science jobs, women in successful jobs that aren't seen as mainly female now. And Dr. Scherer, you qualify in that realm, a woman in science, and you're in aquatic biology. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So tell me, how did you? Let's go back to middle school.
Okay.
What were you like in middle school?
I was very quiet and very bookish. I was always, my parents were always very encouraging of me academically, so I always sort of knew that was where my strengths lay. But I actually, my parents were scuba divers. My mom still is a scuba diver. And they would go on these like trips every year because we lived in Indiana, so there's nowhere to scuba dive there. So they'd go on these fabulous vacations every year, and my dad was an underwater photographer and would come back with these amazing photos. And so I always knew that I wanted to study marine biology. That was always something I was very focused on. And I got certified to dive when I was 11, so that was right around that time.
So you started scuba diving when you were 11. You started exploring the underwater. You took science classes in high school. You started college. How did you define what area of biology you wanted to go into?
Yeah, so that's one that I get asked a lot because I actually did my college in Kentucky, which also doesn't have an ocean. So people always find that kind of odd, but I worked in a really great program. I went to Eastern Kentucky University, and they have an aquatic biology degree. And people I don't think know this, but Kentucky and Tennessee have the largest quantities of freshwater in the country. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and so it's a really interesting place to work. There's a lot of really, especially compared to out here in California, the freshwater systems in that part of the country are very diverse because there's just so many streams and things, and so you end up with all these kind of unique populations. So I did that, and I was able to save a lot of money kind of staying closer to home and going to more reasonably priced school. And I got an amazing biology degree, which is, I think, much more important than sort of specializing early. I worked with a lot of people who, went straight in marine biology. And I think there's a lot of sort of perspective to be gained on learning a more broad skill set before you start to focus. So I did that, but I also spent a lot of time, I studied abroad a couple of times. I did some internships on the ocean. So I definitely was making sure I got as much exposure to the ocean as I could while I was doing that.
So you've had a very exciting learning career, right?
I have,
so,
yeah.
What year did you graduate? What year did you get your PhD?
2017.
2017. So all of that time. And you said, talk about Mexico. What did you do in Mexico?
So Mexico was, after I did college, I went to grad school in Texas. And then when I finished my doctorate, I applied for a Fulbright research scholarship. And Fulbright is really interesting because each sort of country can have its own programs. And so Mexico has a large number of different types of awards, and they had just started a postdoctoral award that they were giving. So I was able to apply to go down there for 9 months and do a postdoctoral research project on lionfish, which are an invasive species down in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico.
So now we have a lot of photos from you.
Yes.
I would like to show some of your photos if you could talk through them. If you're ready, I'm sure that you can identify each one of these. This is a good one. Who took this photo?
So that was a GoPro photo that was left. We actually do these experiments where we leave the cameras out in the field, so nobody wasn't particularly responsible for that. It was actually a still from a video.
And tell me about, what was that fish?
So that's a black bass, or perhaps a striped bass. I'm not great with my fish ID, and the bass can be really hard because they tend to hybridize. But they are also an invasive species. They were introduced because we like to fish them. They're sport fish. And in a lot of cases, we actually still sort of manage to maintain those populations because they are popular for people. But they tend to be a really voracious predator on juvenile salmon. So one of the things that we are interested in my current position, we do river restoration. So we go into areas where the river has been degraded by human activities, and we are trying to restore them to habitat that is more functional for the native salmon populations. And one of the things we're interested in is making sure that we're reducing the rates of predation in those habitats. So this is from a current project we're in the planning and design stages for, and we've been collecting baseline data to see how much predation is currently going on. And at that particular spot, it's a pretty large, deep area where there's a lot of effects on the Merced River in that region from gravel mining. And so the bass really love that habitat, and they will like follow us around and wait for us to leave them snacks.
Really?
They're very bold. Yeah.
Man. So have you worked any in the American River or the Sacramento River?
We don't have any projects on the Sac, but we do work quite a bit on the American River, yeah.
Okay. Because of the salmon?
Yes. So we do steelhead surveys for the BOR on a pretty regular basis. That's an annual contract that we come up for, but we've got them for this year. And so we go out and we survey for where the steelhead are creating their nests and sort of tracking where that's happening. Yeah, I didn't take this photo, though. It's a big Chinook salmon. I don't very often get to work with those guys unless they're dead, so I don't have a lot of pretty pictures of them. But
you're working with the decrepit things.
We're working with the decayed and the decrepit ones, not the one you want to catch and eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do a lot of Chinook salmon work on the LAR as well. We tend to do the carcass surveys. We go out and we collect several different types of samples from them, and we do a lot of work with the Sacramento Water Forum and some of the other organizations that work on the river when they do restoration projects. So we just
so what kind of issues do we have in the American River?
So the American is one of the more urban streams that we work on. There's a lot of.
I think that. Okay, you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, we're losing you.
Oh no, I can hear you, but you're not moving anymore.
Oh, maybe it was me. I thought you froze. I'm going to close some of my things that are open.
Okay.
What kind of issues do we have on the American River?
So the American is one of the more urban rivers that we work on. There's a lot of, it's got a lot of very close human impacts on it. As with sort of all the rivers that humans interact with, and especially on the West Coast here, dams are a real problem for salmon because it cuts off a lot of their traditional habitat above those dams where they would have spawned. And in addition, dams tend to cut off the gravel supply. So normally the gravel that the salmon need to create their nests and to spawn on would be constantly being replenished from upstream. But when you have those dams, that all kind of settles out in the lake above the dam, and then the water that comes through tends to be sort of sediment starved. So there are a lot of the restoration that goes on in that river has to do with sort of replenishing that gravel and creating new spawning habitat.
So let's look at a couple more pictures because I love your picture.
So this is an oyster reef. This is from my my work on my doctorate. So oyster reefs are a really interesting habitat. They're sort of comparable to coral reefs in warmer waters, but since coral can't exist in these colder areas, you end up with oyster reefs that sort of serve the same function. They come about because oysters, very interestingly, tend to grow on one another. So when baby oysters are floating around in the ocean looking for somewhere to live, they tend to like to settle on other oysters, assuming that that as long as there's other oysters living there, that's probably good habitat for them. Yeah, and so these are what the little guys look like. These are actually produced from a hatchery, so they are settled individually in order to make them easier to ship. But I always like to show this photo because most people, if they ever see an oyster, it's because it's on their plate and they're eating it. And a lot of people don't think about what they look like as babies, but just like everything else, they start out very small. And
how long does it take them to get to that oyster eaten size?
So I think in aquaculture, when they're sort of raising them for that specific purpose, they can grow them pretty quickly. And where I was doing my work down in South Texas, because it's so warm there, they can actually, if they're sort of born in the spring, they can get big enough to start reproducing by the end of the summer. But typically about a year before you would have them be big enough that you want to eat.
Okay. All right. And are those oysters that you're showing the kind that you eat?
Yeah, so those are eastern oysters that are found all along the Atlantic and the Gulf Coast of the United States, and those are the ones that people like to eat.
And do you like to eat them?
I've never, well, I maybe have had them fried, but I have spent entirely too much time playing with them to have any desire to eat them.
You know too much. You know too much.
I know too much. I've had, when you have to keep things alive in fish tanks, sometimes things don't go well, and you have to deal with the dead ones, and they get real stinky real fast. So,
all right. So we know about that. Let's go to another picture. All right. What is this?
These are called Blackside dace. They are a small species of stream fish. They're just a couple of inches long, and they are only found in the Cumberland River system, which is in Kentucky, southern Kentucky and Tennessee. So I worked on these as part of my undergraduate research, and they are, because they are endemic to only that small area of river system, they tend to have a lot of really negative impacts from mining in the area and different ways that impacts the stream habitat. So at the time, I haven't actually checked on them in a while, but at the time I was working on them, they were federally listed because of threats to their habitat. And the project I was doing was sort of characterizing where they need to, what kind of habitat they need in order to create their nests, because obviously if they can't have babies, they're not going to make it.
Right. And so do they have babies and they just stay in the stream? They don't go out, they don't leave, they just stay around the same area?
Yeah, the life history that salmon have, where they go out to the stream, is sort of unique, and there's not a ton of fish species that do it because it's very hard to be adapted to live in both freshwater and saltwater. So most things stay where they are born.
Stay where they are. And
yep.
So let's go back to the Sacramento River. Do we have a problem with snails?
So there is an invasive species, the New Zealand mud snail. I'm still learning a lot about this area, so I don't know a ton about them, but I do know that they are a big problem, and we definitely have to do a lot of work if we're working in more than one stream. We have to make sure we're decontaminating everything between systems.
Okay. Let's go to another picture. I love this. I love this picture. This is
So this is a blue crab. These are what I use as my predator species when I was looking at predator-prey interactions on oyster reefs. And these guys are full of personality. They're a lot of fun. I mean, kind of a pain, but in a fun way to work with. So I love this picture because I came in and he was just doing this. And this is actually, that pipe is probably a foot tall. So he's not resting on the bottom. He's holding himself up there. And I always say it looked like he was sort of plotting something.
Yeah, he's like going to use that to catch his next meal.
Or me.
Right? And so what's negative about the blue crabs? Why are they hard?
They're not negative. They're a native predator, so they're a good thing to have in the system. And we like to eat them, so we like their populations to be healthy. But the research I was doing was looking at how the dynamics between the predators and the prey are play out, and in particular, how oysters, when they smell crab predators around, they can actually change the way that they grow their shell so that their shells are stronger and it's harder for the crabs to eat them.
Okay. And they like to eat the oysters.
They do, yep. They like to eat anything. They're not picky, but they do like oysters.
Yeah. And so do you eat blue crab?
I mean, I eat crab for sure. I've had blue crab. I tried soft shell crab once and I couldn't do that because it looked too much like my babies I was trying to keep alive at the time. But yeah, I do like crab cakes.
Okay, all right. See, I'm just going to be checking in with you. So, do you like salmon? Do you eat salmon?
I do. It's not my favorite fish, but I do enjoy it quite a bit as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting to know, because you get into these species and you know them so well. It's like, which ones do you eat? Which ones do you go, no, I can't.
Yeah, it is. I tend to try and rely more on kind of what is what can we eat sustainably. which can be very tricky with fish because it depends a lot on sort of what species and what, especially with something like salmon, they're so population specific to their rivers since they do come back to the same place to spawn every year that it can be very tricky to sort of keep track of all the nuances.
So do you work in that area also, sustainability of the fish populations?
So a lot of what we're doing is trying to help support the state and federal goals in terms of making sure the populations here are sustainable. So there's oh gosh, I'm not going to remember what all the acronyms stand for, but there are several programs in place in California that are aimed at sort of maintaining the size of the populations and getting them back to places that they were a few decades ago.
And that's important work. I mean, it really is. So at the fish hatchery, have you been up to the fish hatchery?
I've actually not been inside the Nimbus Fish Hatchery, but we are outside of it a lot when we do our carcass surveys and things. So yeah, I've gotten to go in and look at the big raceways of all the little babies.
Very fun. It's very fun to go and look and see how the cycles go. I mean, I've been here for eons and took my kids and my grandkids, and it's a very interesting thing that we have in Sacramento.
Yeah.
So going out to the fish hatchery, you don't go into the hatchery, you don't work with those people at all, you're just on the riverbanks?
So we actually use hatchery fish in our experiments quite a bit. We don't tend to run any of those types of studies on the American, but we will apply for CDFW hatchery fish to use on the Stanislaus and the Merced and the Yuba.
Okay.
But I just happen to be the person picking the fish up.
Okay. So how are you working in COVID? I know that you're working from home. What do you do from home?
Yeah, so I am working from home. I'm doing a lot of sort of data analysis and applying for research grants to do additional projects. We've got a lot of project management. There's a lot of moving parts on the work that we do. So there's a lot of project management, making sure all that stuff happens. So a lot of that can happen from home. Yeah.
So Cramer Fish Sciences, how long have they been in business? Tell me a little bit about them.
Yeah, so I know we are an employee-owned company, and we've been fully employee-owned for 2 or 3 years now, I believe. We became partially employee-owned in 2015, and before that we were owned by Steve Cramer. And I am not aware of all the details of the history of the company before that.
Okay, all right.
I know the company has been around in some form or another for quite a while.
Okay, that's good enough. Employee-owned, that's pretty good. And they're located in Sacramento, and they do work all over California or all over the U.S. What's their?
Yeah, so my office is in West Sacramento, and we tend to be very, very focused on river restoration for salmon. But we have several offices. We have one in Modesto that focuses on research and development, and they have a very cool. We have patented a particular boat design that is very good at sampling in shallow water habitats. So that's doing a lot of really cool work out on the Delta. And in particular, that's all video monitoring, so we don't actually have to touch or stress out any of the fish. We're just kind of funneling them in front of a camera. Yeah, it's very cool. But we also have offices up in Portland and in Issaquah, so we do some different work throughout the kind of West Coast and Pacific Northwest.
Okay. Well, I hope you like it here.
I do, yeah. We've been very happy.
For over a year?
Almost 2 years now.
2 years. And so you're settling into Sacramento, sinking down some roots. We got lots of biology that you can work on here.
Oh yeah, the salmon is it's kind of interesting having come from the I mean not the East Coast, but the Midwest and the South. Yeah. The funding that goes into salmon is just very there's a lot of money there. There's a lot of sort of political force to get things done in a way that is not necessarily the case elsewhere.
Okay. I have you have a video. I'd like to show the video if we could.
Yeah. So this is from my postdoc when I was working with Lionfish.
You got it. What was it?
So those are lionfish. I think
Lionfish?
I have one other picture of them in the lab that you guys.
Ah,
Yeah, there we go. So they're very very pretty. A lot of people will be familiar with them from aquarium and things. And they are native to the Pacific Ocean, but they have been introduced here, and they have really their populations have taken off and have really exploded, and are causing lots of problems.
ah,
So the project I was looking at was sort of how normally when you have a species that's introduced to a new habitat, they don't tend to do well because they are not adapted to live there. But occasionally you have species like the lionfish that do manage to survive, and they tend to do very, very well and cause lots of problems for the native habitat and the native organisms. So we were looking at sort of how are they able to do that? How are they able to figure out how to live in a new habitat?
and are you looking at the issues that they're causing and how to regulate the populations?
So that wasn't what my work was looking at. There's a lot going on in that, especially in the last decade or so. They've become a very hot topic because they have done so well, and are decimating a lot of the native populations. So there's definitely a lot of people working in that. But this was more of a kind of trying to figure out, because they are very good at what they've done. They're an interesting opportunity to sort of understand why some species are able to do this when most of them cannot. And so we were looking at how, because they're so smart and they can actually adapt very quickly, and they can learn by watching other lionfish, that helps them sort of navigate these new habitats in a way that makes them good invaders.
Okay, and we have your website that's going across the bottom on the ticker.
Yeah.
I love that you have a website that people can follow you. Um,
Yeah.
have you mentored any young girls? Are you doing anything in outreach to help? I think this is going to help, because what we really want to do is show young women and girls that there are possibilities in anything. If you like scuba diving, you can follow Avery and take that tour and become a doctor. You know what? Let's talk about the doctor title. I'm sure that
Okay.
you heard about Dr. Jill Biden.
I
Have you
did.
heard
Yeah.
all the ruckus of that?
I have. Yeah.
It's like,
I actually don't normally include doctor when I type my name in for things like this, but yeah, I felt like I needed to
I
stand
think
with.
that's important now. I think that it's time for, because if you were a male, people wouldn't question it. Um,
No, not at all.
you know, so I think that it's important that you put the doctor on there and to talk about it. So what did you think when Dr. Biden was questioned on using her title and the guy called her kiddo? It's like, what? Oh my
You know,
God.
you would never ever say that to a man ever. And it's there's always a lot of jokes about, like, you're not an MD, you're not a real doctor, which is total nonsense, because doctor was used as a term
You had to
for.
go through the same.
Well,
Yeah,
not like
you
doctor was associated with doctorates before it was associated with medical doctors. That just happens to be the face of doctors that people see more often. But yeah, there's, you spend 5 years becoming the world's foremost expert in a very specific thing, and learning, more than anything anybody's ever known about a topic, and becoming committed to your work in a way that is in many ways sort of unreasonable. And so, once you've done that, like, you earned it, and nobody gets to tell you that it's comical, or it's not, like, you
yeah.
should just be doing it. You shouldn't be using it because it would make other people more comfortable. That's not the point.
No, that's not the point. It is to give you full credibility about the expertise that you bring forward. I think
Yes.
that it's more about respecting the time that you put into developing your career. I do hope that you use doctor on everything that comes up from now on, because it really is important. As a woman with a doctorate, it's important that you shine, and it's more acting as a role model than it is anything that has to do with um, using the title to gain something that's not appropriate. You
Yeah.
earned it.
I did, and it's not that I don't use it. I guess when I do outreach stuff like this, I tend to want to be very approachable. I want to sort of break down that idea that it's only like older white men in lab coats that get to be scientists. And so I tend to try and make myself more approachable, but it's it's maybe something I
Okay,
need to be
well,
pushing
we
more.
have that photo that makes you more approachable that I want to show now.
Okay.
Let's show this more This is the approachable Dr. Scherer. This is so cool. Tell me
Yeah.
about where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, so this was when I was in Mexico. I'd have to go catch those lionfish on my own, like we saw in the video. And so this vegetation is called sargassum. It actually lives on the surface of the ocean, but because of that, it gets blown around by the winds and the currents. So if you live on the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic coast, you know that occasionally this stuff just kind of washes in mass, and it tends to stay there for a long time. So this was about 2 feet thick, and it was totally covering the area where I could find the fish, and I still needed them, so I just had to go out underneath all of that anyway.
But it's just hysterical. That's hysterical. So
Yeah.
I think that let's see. We have. I think that's the end of the photos. We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
How do you see yourself in 5-10 years? What are some of the next things that you might do?
Yeah, so it's been very nice finally being in when you take a science track, a lot of times there's a lot of moving for degrees and temporary work and things. So just being able to sort of be here and be permanent now is very exciting, and I'm very excited to just sort of get to know this area better and sort of be able. One of the things I really like about my role now is that I get to see a lot of the direct impacts of what my research is finding and how that is like directly related to the way that humans in this area are interacting with the environment. So it's going to be exciting, especially our projects tend to be sort of large scale. It can take 5 to 10 years for us to get through the full process. So some of the things I'm working on now, I won't see come to fruition for quite a while, and it'll be exciting to be here and see that all the way through.
Well, I hope that you do. So what's one thing that you would like to see changed here in Sacramento in the work that you do?
Oh gosh.
What
I
needs to
think
happen?
I think sort of appreciating, in many ways, we are as a society very removed from the natural processes that we're dependent on in a way that makes it sort of seem like we're not dependent on them. And so I think understanding that this area is very important for providing water to the entire state in a way that Southern Californians don't ever see the way that impacts the environment up here. So I think just having people get a better understanding of the way that we are actually still a part of the ecosystem, even if we don't always see it.
Right. See, making sure that everybody knows that we're connected. We're connected to all the things that we touch, and we need to touch them gently.
Yes, exactly.
and not dump things into the drains that are going into the rivers. And I mean, we're doing some work with the stormwater groups here in Sacramento, and it is your drains in your street are going right to the river. So don't dump things in there. Don't put your dog poop in the gutter. Don't. I mean, it's like all of those things that people just don't think about, how we're connected to the greater picture. And the impact that we're the invasive species here.
Yeah, we are. We are the biggest invasive species for sure.
And so I hope that that you find these things out. You work hard on your stuff, and you can create the change that we need. We'll be working on at Uptown Studios. We'll be working on social change so that we can have better people that are using a lighter touch on everything. That's some of the work that we do. So we're invested in it too.
That's great. That's some of the most important, getting the people to change.
Right? The people change. So what's lasting words that you can share with us, maybe to some young women or girls that will happen to come across this?
I think just maybe be prepared for the fact that it is going to be tougher than it should be, but that it is, the science is totally worth it.
And you can be a doctor and be proud.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I appreciate you taking the time with us. I love what you do. I love the photos. And I love that you're using doctor. Please continue to use it. I think that it's important. It's part of the role model that you can be, especially today, especially with the Dr. Biden's issues that came up. It's like, be proud, be out there. And if anybody's asking you about it, say, Tina told me I had to.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to you guys today, and I had a great time.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that that's it for our this week, and next week, next Tuesday at 11 o'clock, catch us again. We will have somebody new. I'm not sure who we have next week. Or no, I think we passed next week because of the holiday. Check our Facebook and we'll let you know. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.